Picture the Sahara Desert, sand stretching forever, heat waves rising off dunes, nothing alive for miles, the driest place on earth. Now picture this. 10,000 years ago, that same desert was green. Not just green, lush, lakes everywhere, rivers flowing, hippos wallowing in marshes, elephants walking through grasslands, giraffes browsing on trees, and people, thousands of people, fishing, hunting, building villages, living comfortable lives in what is now the most hostile desert on the planet. This isn't speculation. We know it happened. The evidence is everywhere once you know where to look. Rock art covers cliff faces deep in the Sahara, paintings of cattle, images of hunters with spears, scenes of people swimming in the Sahara. The artists painted what they saw: water, animals, life. Archaeologists have found the bones, crocodile skeletons buried under sand dunes, fish fossils in dried lake beds, pollen from oak trees and cedar forests preserved in ancient soil. The Sahara kept records of its own death. Satellite imaging reveals something even stranger. Beneath the sand, invisible to the naked eye, are the ghosts of ancient rivers, massive river systems that once flowed across North Africa, tributaries branching like veins, deltas spreading into vanished lakes, all of it hidden now, buried under billions of tons of sand. Core samples drilled from the ocean floor off the African coast tell the same story. Layers of sediment, each layer a snapshot of a different time. The older layers contain pollen from tropical plants, dust from savanna soils, evidence of rain, lots of rain. Then something changes. The newer layers are different. Just sand, desert sand, blown out to sea by winds that found nothing to stop them. So here's the question that haunts climate scientists and archaeologists. What happened? How does a region bigger than the United States transform from paradise to wasteland? And why did it happen so fast? Because it was fast. Terrifyingly fast. The transition took maybe 1,000 years. That sounds like a long time. It's not. Not in geological terms, not in climate terms. 1,000 years is a blink. One moment you're living beside a lake. Your grandchildren are living in a dust bowl. Your great-grandchildren are gone, driven out by drought and heat and the slow death of everything green. This wasn't the first time. That's what makes it even stranger. The Sahara has done this before. Turned green, turned to desert, turned green again. Over and over. A cycle that repeats every 20,000 years or so. Like clockwork. Like breathing. The planet's largest desert appears and disappears on a schedule we're only beginning to understand. And here's what keeps me up at night. It could happen again, in reverse. The Sahara could turn green. Maybe in our lifetimes. Maybe in our children's lifetimes. The same forces that killed it could bring it back. To understand what happened, we need to see what the Sahara used to look like. If you're liking the content, please support by subscribing to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's continue. The first clue came from the bottom of ancient lakes. Not the lakes themselves. Those dried up thousands of years ago. But their beds remained. Flat expanses of cracked earth. Sediment layers baked hard by the sun. And buried in that sediment, scientists found something remarkable. Diatoms. Tiny algae with shells made of silica. Each species needs specific conditions to survive. Some like fresh water, others tolerate salt, some need deep water, others live in shallows. When they die, their shells sink. They pile up on lake bottoms, layer after layer, a record of changing conditions written in microscopic fossils. In the 1980s, researchers started drilling cores from these dried lake beds, pulling up cylinders of sediment. Each core was a timeline. The deeper you went, the further back in time you travelled. The diatoms told a story. At the bottom of the cores from 10,000 years ago, they found species that live in deep, fresh water, lakes that never dried up, permanent water. Then moving up through time, the species changed. Shallower water types appeared. Then species that tolerate seasonal drying. Then nothing, just dust. But it was the pollen that really painted the picture. Pollen preserves incredibly well. Each plant species produces distinctive pollen grains. Oak pollen looks different from grass pollen, cedar different from acacia, and pollen travels on the wind. It settles on lake surfaces, sinks to the bottom, gets buried in sediment, waits. The cores from Saharan lake beds contain pollen from plants that don't exist there anymore. Oak trees, Mediterranean cypress, plants that need 400 millimeters of rain per year. The Sahara today gets less than 25 millimeters in most places. Some areas get nothing for years. Lake Megachad tells the clearest story. Today, Lake Chad is a shadow of itself, a shallow puddle in the southern Sahara. It shrinks every year. But 10,000 years ago it was massive. Geologists call it Lake Megachad. The name fits. It covered 400,000 square kilometers, bigger than the Caspian Sea, deeper than Lake Superior in places. You could have sailed a ship across it for days without seeing land. How do we know? The shorelines are still there. Ancient beach ridges run across the landscape, hundreds of kilometers from the current lake. Wave-cut cliffs stand in the middle of nowhere. Sand dunes that formed on ancient beaches now sit high and dry. You can walk along these ghost shorelines, see where waves once lapped, find shells of freshwater mollusks scattered in the sand. The sediment cores from Megachad's ancient bed show something fascinating. The lake didn't just shrink gradually. It died in pulses, long stable periods, then sudden drops, then recovery, then another drop, like something kept hitting it, again and again. But the most dramatic evidence comes from what lived in the water. Nile perch bones, thousands of them, found in dried lake beds across the central Sahara. These fish can grow 2 meters long. They need deep, permanent water. They're still common in East African lakes. But in the Sahara? The last Nile perch died there at least 5,000 years ago. Crocodile fossils show up everywhere, not just near the current Nile, deep in what's now pure desert, the Tenere region, the Tanesruft, places where nothing lives now except a few scorpions and beetles. But dig down a few meters and you find crocodile vertebrae, teeth, skull fragments. Crocodiles need water year-round. They can't estivate like some frogs, can't burrow and wait out dry seasons. They need rivers or lakes that never dry up. The presence of crocodiles proves permanent water existed. Hippo bones tell the same story. These animals need to submerge daily. They can't survive without water, yet their fossils appear in rock shelters and cave deposits throughout the Sahara, places that haven't seen rain in living memory. Then there are the fish fossils that shouldn't exist at all. Tilapia, catfish, species that live in the Niger and Senegal river systems today, but their bones show up in dried lake beds in the central Sahara, hundreds of kilometers from any current river. How did they get there? The answer is rivers we can't see anymore. Satellite radar can penetrate sand. It reveals what's buried beneath, and what it shows is stunning. Ancient river channels crisscross the Sahara, massive systems, some as wide as the Nile. They flowed north from the African highlands, branched into deltas, fed into lakes. One system, called the Tamanrasset, ran through southern Algeria. It drained an area the size of France, carried water from the Hoggar Mountains north toward the Mediterranean. The channel is still there under the sand, 50 meters deep in places. You can trace it for 500 kilometers, Another system ran through what's now Mali and Niger, multiple channels braiding together, creating wetlands, supporting huge populations of fish and birds and people. Chemical analysis of the sediments confirms it. The sand contains minerals that only form underwater, clay particles that settle out in still water, chemical signatures of algae blooms. Everything points to the same conclusion: water, everywhere, for thousands of years. But here's what makes the evidence really compelling. We can date it. Radiocarbon dating of organic material in the lake sediments, optically stimulated luminescence dating of sand grains, uranium-thorium dating of carbonate deposits, multiple methods, all agreeing. The Green Sahara peaked between 9,000 and 6,000 years ago. That's when the lakes were fullest, the rivers strongest, the vegetation thickest. Then around 5,500 years ago, things started changing. The lake levels dropped, rivers shrank, vegetation thinned. By 4,000 years ago, most of the Sahara looked like it does today: desert. The transition took about 1,500 years. 3 generations might see the same lake. Then their great-grandchildren would see it half gone. Their great-great-grandchildren would see dust. But the evidence shows it wasn't smooth. It happened in jerks, periods of rapid drying, then brief recoveries, then more drying. Like the climate couldn't decide what to do, like it was flickering between 2 states. The pollen record shows this clearly. Layers of tree pollen, then grass pollen, then desert shrub pollen, then back to grass briefly, then nothing but dust. The vegetation kept trying to hang on, kept getting pushed back, until finally it gave up. Ocean sediment cores off the African coast confirm the timeline. They show pulses of dust, massive amounts of sand blown off the continent. The dust layers correspond exactly with the drying periods on land. When the Sahara died, the ocean noticed. Even the chemistry of stalagmites in caves tells the story. Stalagmites grow from dripping water. The isotope ratios in the calcium carbonate record rainfall. More rain means different ratios. The stalagmites from North African caves show the rainfall dropping, steadily, relentlessly. So we know it happened. We know when it happened. We know how fast it happened. The evidence is overwhelming, undeniable, written in rock and bone and pollen and dust. But knowing that it happened doesn't explain why. What force could drain a sea-sized lake? What could kill rivers that flowed for thousands of years? What could turn forests into sand dunes? The answer lies not in the Sahara itself, but in the sky above it. The climate didn't just decide to change on its own. Something bigger was happening, something that affects the entire planet, a cycle that's been repeating for hundreds of thousands of years, a rhythm written in ice and stone and the tilt of Earth itself. To understand what killed the Green Sahara, we need to look up, way up, past the clouds, past the atmosphere, into the mechanics of how our planet moves through space. The Sahara wasn't alone. When North Africa turned green, other deserts around the world were changing too. The Arabian Peninsula, parts of India, northern China, the Thar Desert, all of them got wetter at roughly the same time, and all of them dried out around the same time. This wasn't coincidence. This was pattern. Scientists call it the African Humid Period. But that name misses something important. It wasn't just African, it was global. A shift in rainfall that touched multiple continents. A reorganization of where rain fell and where it didn't. The best comparison is the Serengeti. Today, the Serengeti is one of the last great wildlife refuges in Africa. Endless grasslands, migrating herds, predators following prey. It's what people imagine when they think of wild Africa. The Green Sahara looks similar, maybe even more diverse. Archaeologists found elephant bones scattered across what's now empty desert. Not modern African elephants, straight tusked elephants, massive animals that stood 13 feet tall at the shoulder. They needed water daily, hundreds of gallons. They couldn't survive more than a day's walk from a reliable water source. The bones are everywhere. Northern Mali, central Libya, western Egypt, southern Algeria. Elephants ranged across the entire region, which means water was everywhere too. Giraffe fossils appear in the same layers. Giraffes are browsers. They eat leaves from trees, acacia trees mostly. The presence of giraffes tells you something specific. There were trees, lots of them, spread across landscapes that are now pure sand. But here's what's really interesting. The species weren't quite the same as today's Serengeti animals. The elephants were different. The giraffes were different. Even the antelopes were different species. Not dramatically different, but distinct. Like they'd been isolated for a long time, evolving, separately, adapting to slightly different conditions. This suggests something important. The greening of the Sahara wasn't a one-time event. It had happened before, many times before. Each time animals moved in, populations established themselves, adapted. Then when the desert returned, survivors retreated south, back to the permanent savannas, the ones that stayed wet through the dry periods. The Serengeti is one of those permanent refuges. It never fully dried out, even during the worst droughts, even during ice ages when most of Africa was drier. The Serengeti kept enough rain to sustain large animals. So when the Sahara turned green, animals didn't appear from nowhere. They expanded north from refuges like the Serengeti, following the rain, following the grass, moving into newly habitable territory. Think about what this means for the animals, for the elephants especially. An elephant lives 60 to 70 years, long enough to remember, long enough to learn. Elephant. Herds pass down knowledge. Where water is during dry seasons, which routes to take during migrations, what plants are safe to eat. But the greening of the Sahara happened over centuries. No elephant lived long enough to remember the desert. To them, the Sahara had always been green. It was home. It was normal. The drying happened over centuries too, slow enough that maybe they didn't notice. Each generation, the dry season lasted a little longer. Waterholes that used to be permanent became seasonal. Then they stopped filling at all. The elephants would have moved, following the water as it retreated, ranging further to find food, concentrating around the last reliable water sources. Eventually those failed too. The bones tell us where they died, clustered around dried lake beds, scattered along ancient river channels, places that used to have water, places where elephants waited for rain that never came. Some herds must have made it south, back to the permanent savannas. Those are the ancestors of today's African elephants, the ones that remembered the route, the ones that left before it was too late. But many didn't make it. The distance was too far. The desert expanded faster than they could retreat. Or maybe they just didn't know they needed to retreat. How do you know to leave home when home is all you've ever known? Lions lived in the Green Sahara too. Cave paintings show them clearly. Large cats with manes, hunting in groups. The paintings depict them taking down large prey, probably buffalo or antelope. Modern lions live in the Serengeti, but they used to live across North Africa, even into southern Europe. Lion bones have been found in Greece, in Spain, in southern France. During warm periods when grassland spread north, lions followed. The Sahara lions probably look similar to Serengeti lions, maybe slightly different colouring, adaptations to local conditions, but essentially the same animal. When the Sahara dried, the lions faced the same choice as the elephants: move south or die. Most died. A few populations survived in isolated pockets. The last Barbary lions in Morocco lived until the 1920s, hunted to extinction by humans, but they were remnants. survivors of a much larger population that once ranged across North Africa. Hippos are the strangest evidence. Hippos are water animals. They spend most of their time submerged. They can't survive without permanent deep water. Their skin dries out in direct sun. They overheat quickly on land. Yet hippo bones appear throughout the Sahara, in Chad, in Niger, in southern Libya, places that haven't had surface water in 5,000 years. The bones are sometimes found in groups, multiple individuals in the same location. This suggests permanent water holes, deep pools where hippo herds lived year-round. Not seasonal streams, permanent lakes. Imagine standing in what's now the Tenere Desert, one of the most barren places on Earth, nothing but sand and rock for hundreds of miles, daytime temperatures reaching 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Now imagine that same spot with a lake, a deep lake, cool water, hippos surfacing to breathe, crocodiles sunning on the banks. That's not imagination, that's history. That actually existed. The bones prove it. The crocodile fossils are even more widespread than the hippos. Crocodiles can survive in smaller water sources. They're more adaptable. They can go longer without food, but they still need water. They're reptiles. They can't regulate their body temperature without it. Nile crocodiles today live across sub-Saharan Africa, but their fossils appear hundreds of miles north of their current range, in Algeria, in Libya, in Egypt's western desert, all places that are now completely dry. Some of these fossils are huge, individuals that would have been 15 or 20 feet long, ancient crocodiles living in ancient rivers, rivers that flowed for thousands of years, then stopped. The bird evidence is more subtle, but equally important. Ostrich eggs, thousands of them, scattered across the desert, some intact, most broken, all of them old. Ostriches need open grassland. They can survive on relatively little water. They get most of their moisture from plants, but they need vegetation. They need something to eat. People collected ostrich eggs, used them as water containers. The shells are thick. They hold about a litre, perfect for storing water. Dozens of decorated ostrich eggs have been found at archaeological sites across the Sahara, painted with patterns, carved with designs. This tells you something about the people too. They had enough security to make art, enough stability to invest time in decorating water containers. This wasn't desperate survival. This was comfortable living. The Serengeti today supports about 1.3 million wildebeest, plus hundreds of thousands of zebras, gazelles, buffalo, elephants, all the predators that hunt them. It's one of the most productive ecosystems on Earth. The Green Sahara was bigger than the Serengeti. Much bigger. The Serengeti covers about 12,000 square miles. The Sahara is 3.6 million square miles. Even if only part of it was as productive as the Serengeti, we're talking about an ecosystem that supported millions of large animals. Where did they all go? Most died. Some retreated south. A few species went extinct entirely. The straight-tusked elephants are gone. The giant buffalo that once lived in North Africa are gone. Several antelope species disappeared. But the strangest fossils in the Sahara aren't elephants or lions, they're whales. Whales. In the middle of the Sahara Desert, hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean. Not whale bones washed up on an ancient beach. Not fossils from when the area was underwater millions of years ago. Those exist too. But that's different. That's from when all of North Africa was ocean, back in the age of dinosaurs. These whale fossils are different, they're recent. Geologically speaking, from 40 million years ago, long after the dinosaurs, long after North Africa became land. The site is called Wadi al-Hitan, Valley of the Whales. It's in Egypt, in the Western Desert, about 100 miles southwest of Cairo. The fossils lie scattered across the sand, exposed. weathering out of ancient rock, complete skeletons, some of them 40 feet long, Basilosaurus, an early whale, primitive but recognizable, long body, flippers, tail flukes. But here's what makes them strange. They have legs, small legs, vestigial, useless for walking, but unmistakably legs, hip bones, knee joints, tiny feet with toes. These whales were caught in transition, evolving from land animals back to the sea, still carrying remnants of their terrestrial past. The rock they're buried in tells the story. Limestone, formed from the compressed remains of tiny sea creatures. This wasn't desert when these whales died. This was ocean. Shallow tropical ocean. Warm water, rich with life. 40 million years ago, a sea-covered northern Egypt, the Tethys Sea. It connected to what would become the Mediterranean, extended south into Africa, created a coastline hundreds of miles inland from where the coast is today. The whales swam in this sea, hunted fish, gave birth to live young. Then they died. Their bodies sank, got buried in sediment, slowly fossilized. The sea retreated. The land rose. The climate dried. The desert advanced. Now their bones lie in sand, under a sun that would have killed them in minutes. This is important for understanding the Green Sahara, because it shows how dramatically geography can change, how places transform, how what seems permanent isn't. 40 million years ago, ocean. 20 million years ago, the sea retreated. 10 million years ago, grassland. 5 million years ago, the Sahara started forming. Then 10,000 years ago, it turned green again. Now it's desert again. The earth doesn't stay still. Continents drift, seas come and go, mountains rise and erode. Climate zones shift. What's desert becomes ocean, becomes forest, becomes desert again. The whale fossils prove something else. They prove the ocean was really there. Not legend, not myth. Actual ocean, with actual sea creatures, living their lives, completely unaware that millions of years later their bones would lie in one of the driest places on Earth. Scientists found other marine fossils at Wadi al-Hitan, sharks, sea turtles, sawfish, dugongs, all mixed together, all from the same period, all telling the same story. The limestone itself is evidence. Limestone forms from calcium carbonate, the shells and skeletons of marine organisms, billions of tiny creatures living and dying, their remains settling to the sea floor, compressing over millions of years, turning to stone. You can see fossilized shells in the rock, tiny spirals, ancient mollusks, some no bigger than a grain of rice, others the size of your fist, all preserved, all proof. The whales at Wadi al-Hitan aren't alone. Similar fossils appear across North Africa, in Libya, in Algeria, in Morocco, wherever the ancient Tethys Sea once reached. But the Egyptian site is special. The fossils are remarkably complete and remarkably abundant. Over 400 whale skeletons have been found there, some still articulated, bones in the right positions, spines intact, skulls attached to vertebrae. This suggests something about how they died. Maybe a bay that became cut off from the main sea, water that became too warm or too salty, a mass die-off, bodies settling to the bottom in calm water, getting buried quickly before scavengers could scatter the bones. The desert preserved them perfectly. No rain to dissolve the fossils, no plants to break them apart, no erosion from rivers, just wind and sand, covering them, protecting them, until wind and sand exposed them again. Tourists visit Wadi al-Hitan now. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You can walk among the fossils, see whale, spines stretching across the desert floor, touch bones that once belonged to creatures that swam in an ocean that no longer exists. It's disorienting, standing in the desert, surrounded by sand, looking at the skeleton of a sea creature. Your brain struggles to reconcile it. Whales need water. This place has no water. How can both things be true? But they are, both true. The whale was here. The water was here. Then the water left. The whale stayed, turned to stone, waited. This is what the earth does. It transforms. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't warn anyone. It just changes. Slowly, usually, but inevitably. The Green Sahara fits into this pattern. It's not an anomaly. It's part of a cycle, a rhythm that's been playing out for millions of years. Wet periods and dry periods, green and brown, life and emptiness. The whale fossils are from much earlier, from a completely different climate cycle, but they prove the same principle. Nothing is permanent, everything changes. Given enough time, ocean becomes desert, desert becomes ocean, or grassland, or forest. The people who lived in the Green Sahara didn't know about the whales. They had no way to know, no concept of deep time, no understanding of geology. They probably walked past whale fossils sometimes, saw strange bones in the rock, maybe wondered what they were, maybe made up stories, giant monsters, creatures from the time before time, bones of gods. Who knows what they thought? But they were living in a green land that would become desert, just like the whales had lived in an ocean that would become land. Same place, different time, different form. This is what makes the Sahara so fascinating. It's not just one thing, it's layers. Ocean, land, grassland, desert, grassland again, desert again. Each era leaving evidence. Each transformation recorded in stone and sand and bone. The whale bones say the ocean was there millions of years ago, but what about the people who lived there thousands of years ago? Did they leave evidence too? Not just paintings, not just fossils, but something more direct, something more human. They did. And what they left behind is even stranger than whale bones in the desert. Human bones, hundreds of them, buried in cemeteries that are now surrounded by sand, graves that were dug when this was green land, when there was water, when people could live here. The bones tell stories about who these people were, where they came from, how they lived, and how they died. Some of the graves are elaborate, bodies buried with jewellery, with tools, with offerings. This suggests culture, ritual, belief in an afterlife, people who had time to think about death, to prepare for it, to honour their dead. Other graves are simple, just a body in the sand, covered with stones, no offerings, no ceremony. Maybe these were different people, different beliefs, or maybe just different circumstances. Death during travel, death during hard times, quick burials without ritual. The skeletons themselves reveal information. Height, age at death, health, diet, injuries, signs of disease, evidence of violence. Many show signs of hard physical labour, worn joints, stress fractures, compressed vertebrae. These were people who worked, who carried heavy loads, who walked long distances, who lived physically demanding lives. But they weren't starving. The bone density is good. No signs of chronic malnutrition. No evidence of frequent famine. These were people who ate well, who had enough, who lived in a place that provided. The teeth tell their own story, worn down from grit in the food, but not rotten, not infected. A diet of grain, probably, ground on stone. The grit from the grinding stones wore down the tooth enamel, but the diet itself was adequate, enough nutrition, enough variety. Some graves contain children, infants, toddlers, young kids. This is sad, but also informative. It means people were raising families here, settling down, building communities. You Don't raise children in a place you're just passing through. The cemeteries are in specific locations, near where lakes used to be, near ancient river channels. This makes sense. People buried their dead near their settlements, and settlements were near water. Some cemeteries have dozens of graves, others have hundreds. This suggests populations, groups of people living together, not just small bands, actual communities, villages, maybe even towns. The graves span thousands of years. The oldest are from around 10,000 years ago. The newest are from around 5,000 years ago. 5,000 years of continuous occupation. 5,000 years of people living, dying, being buried in what is now empty desert. Then the graves stop. Not gradually, abruptly. The last burials cluster around the same time period, around 5,000 years ago. Then nothing. No more graves, no more people. They didn't all die at once. They left, moved away, followed the water as it retreated, left their dead behind, left their cemeteries behind, abandoned the land that had sustained them for millennia. The graves remain, markers of a vanished world, evidence of human presence in a place that now seems inhuman, proof that people lived here, thrived here, built lives here, until they couldn't anymore. In 1933, a Hungarian explorer named Laszlo Almásy was flying over the Gilf Kebir Plateau in southwestern Egypt. He was mapping the desert, looking for ancient caravan routes. His plane passed over a remote cliff face. He saw something strange, markings on the rock, too regular to be natural. He circled back, got closer. There were paintings, human figures, animals, and something else. People swimming. In one of the driest places on Earth, Almásy landed his plane, hiked to the cliff. The paintings covered the rock face, dozens of figures, all painted in red ochre. Some showed people floating, arms outstretched, legs kicking, the unmistakable posture of swimmers. Other figures showed people diving, bodies horizontal, arms forward, heads down, like they were diving into water. He called it the Cave of Swimmers, though it's not really a cave, more of a rock shelter, an overhang that protected the paintings from direct sun and rain, protected them for thousands of years. The paintings are old, really old. Dating suggests they're between 8,000 and 9,000 years old, made when the Sahara was still green, when water covered the landscape, when people could actually swim there. The figures aren't crude stick drawings. They show skill, understanding of anatomy, movement captured in stone. The artist knew what swimming looked like. They'd done it themselves. They were painting from memory, from experience. Some figures show people in boats, simple canoes, paddling across what must have been lakes or rivers. Other paintings show fish, big fish, the kind you'd catch and eat, the kind that need deep water to survive. There are animals too, giraffes, elephants, antelope, all painted with the same red ochre, all sharing space with the swimmers. This wasn't a gallery of mythical creatures. This was documentation, a record of daily life. The Cave of Swimmers became famous. Michael Ondaatje featured it in his novel The English Patient. The movie made it iconic, but the real cave is more remarkable than any fiction, because it's not alone. The Gilf Kebir region contains hundreds of rock art sites, maybe thousands. Every sheltered cliff face has paintings. Every overhang holds images. The entire plateau is an open-air museum of the Green Sahara. Most sites show the same themes: water, animals, people living comfortable lives. But each site adds details, pieces of a larger picture. Some paintings show cattle, herds of cattle, with herders watching over them. This is important. Cattle need grass. They need water. You can't herd cattle in a desert. These paintings prove the land supported livestock, supported agriculture, supported settled communities. Other sites show hunting scenes, men with bows, tracking antelope, surrounding prey, working together. The paintings capture strategy, coordination, planning. These weren't desperate people scraping by. These were skilled hunters with time to perfect their craft. There are paintings of women gathering plants, children playing, dogs running alongside hunters, domestic scenes, normal life, the kind of life that happens when people aren't constantly struggling to survive. The pigments themselves tell a story. Red ochre is iron oxide. You find it in certain rocks. The artists ground it into powder, mixed it with animal fat or plant oils, created paint that would last millennia. Yellow ochre appears in some paintings, white clay in others, black from charcoal or manganese. The artist had a palette. They made choices, used different colours for different subjects. This shows sophistication, artistic tradition, cultural knowledge passed down through generations. Some paintings show layers, earlier images painted over or painted next to. This means people came back to these sites, used them repeatedly, maybe for ceremonies, maybe for teaching, maybe just because they were sacred places, important places. The style changes over time. Earlier paintings are simpler, later ones more detailed. You can see artistic development, skills improving, techniques refined. This suggests stability, communities staying in one region long enough to develop artistic traditions. But there's something haunting about the Cave of Swimmers specifically. The way the figures float, peaceful, relaxed, like swimming was normal, like water was everywhere, like they couldn't imagine a future where this place would be bone dry. The rock shelter faces east. Morning sun lights up the paintings. The red ochre glows. For a few minutes each dawn the swimmers seem to move. Shadows shift. The figures appear to kick and glide. Then the sun rises higher. The effect fades. The paintings return to stillness. Frozen in time, waiting. Modern visitors have to drive for days to reach the Cave of Swimmers, through empty desert, over dunes, across plains of nothing. You need special permits, experienced guides, lots of water, satellite navigation. The isolation is profound. No plants, no animals, no water for hundreds of miles, just rock and sand and heat. Standing in front of the paintings, the disconnect is overwhelming. Your eyes see swimmers. Your brain knows there's no water. The two realities can't coexist, but they do. Scientists have studied the paintings carefully, documented every figure, analysed the pigments, tried to understand who made them, when exactly, why. DNA analysis of ancient remains from the region suggests the artists were related to modern Nilo-Saharan peoples, groups that now live much farther south, near actual water, near the Nile, near Lake Chad. Their ancestors painted these caves, then migrated away when the water left. The paintings served multiple purposes probably. Art for its own sake, religious significance, historical record, teaching tools, maps maybe, showing where water could be found, where animals gathered, where the good hunting was. Some researchers think the swimming scenes might be ceremonial, ritual bathing, spiritual cleansing, not just recreational swimming. The way the figures are positioned, arms spread wide, faces upturned, could suggest religious meaning. But maybe they were just swimming. Maybe it was hot. Maybe there was a lake nearby. Maybe after a day of herding cattle or gathering plants, people went for a swim, cooled off, enjoyed themselves. Maybe it was that simple. The Cave of Swimmers represents something specific, a moment in time, a window into lives lived in a place that no longer exists. Not metaphorically, literally. The landscape changed completely. The environment transformed. The world those artists knew vanished. But they left evidence, proof that they were there, that they swam in water that's gone, that they lived in a green land that turned to sand. The painting survived everything, outlasted the lakes, outlasted the grass, outlasted the people who made them. Other caves in the region show different scenes. The Cave of Beasts has paintings of headless figures, strange beings, possibly mythological, possibly shamanic visions. Nobody knows for sure. The meanings are lost. Wadi Sura contains paintings of tiny people, hundreds of them, covering the rock face like a crowd, a gathering, a celebration maybe, or a migration, or just an artist's vision of their community. Each site adds information. Each painting is a data point. Together they paint a picture of a thriving culture. People adapted to their environment, making art, raising families, building lives, completely unaware that it would all end. The paintings stop around 5,000 years ago. The latest images show different animals, species that tolerate drier conditions, oryx, addax, desert-adapted creatures. The cattle disappear from the art, the swimmers disappear, the fish disappear. The final paintings show people leaving, figures walking, carrying possessions, heading south, heading east, following the water. The artist documented their own exodus, left a record of abandonment, then they left too. Now the caves are silent. The paintings watch over empty desert, swimmers frozen mid-stroke in a sea of sand, waiting for water that will never return. Or will it? The cycle suggests the Sahara will turn green again, eventually, in 15,000 years maybe, when Earth's tilt changes, when the monsoons return. But that's a long time to wait, a long time for paintings to endure, a long time for memories to persist in stone. The Tassili Nadja Plateau rises from the Algerian Sahara like a fortress. Steep cliffs, flat top, rock formations carved by wind into strange shapes. It looks like another planet, Mars maybe, redstone. No, vegetation. Just rock and sand and silence. But the cliffs hold secrets. In 1933, French soldiers stationed in southern Algeria reported something odd. Paintings on rock faces. Lots of them. Nobody paid much attention at first. Remote outpost. Bored soldiers, probably seeing things. But the reports kept coming. Different soldiers, different locations, all describing the same thing. Paintings covering the canyon walls, images of animals that didn't belong, scenes that made no sense. In 1956, a French ethnologist named Henri Lot organised a proper expedition. He brought a team, brought supplies, brought cameras. They spent 16 months documenting what they found. Over 15,000 paintings and engravings. 15,000! Not scattered across the entire Sahara, just in this one plateau region, concentrated in the canyons and rock shelters of Tassili Nadja, the largest collection of prehistoric art in the world. The paintings cover different periods, different styles, different subjects. The oldest ones date back 12,000 years. Simple engravings, geometric patterns, abstract designs, hard to interpret. But around 9,000 years ago, the style changes. The images become clear, recognizable. You can see what the artists intended, and what they painted was life. Daily life in a world nothing like today's Sahara. The paintings show cattle, hundreds of images of cattle, herds grazing, bulls fighting, cows with calves, herders watching over them. These aren't wild animals, these are domesticated cattle. You can tell by the way they're grouped, the way people interact with them, the way they're clearly managed. Cattle herding requires grass, lots of grass. A single cow needs about 30 pounds of vegetation daily. A herd needs pasture, water sources, seasonal migration routes. You can't herd cattle in pure desert. The paintings prove the land supported agriculture, supported pastoral communities, supported a way of life complete. Impossible today. Some paintings show milking scenes. Women crouch beside cows, containers ready. This is important. Milking cattle means you're not just hunting them, you're living with them, managing them, building your culture around them. These were settled communities, or at least seasonally settled, moving with the herds but returning to the same places. Other paintings show hunting, men with bows and arrows, tracking animals, surrounding prey, working as teams. The prey species are fascinating. Elephants, rhinos, hippos, giraffes, buffalo, antelope of several species, all painted with careful attention to detail. The artist knew these animals intimately. You can see it in the paintings, the way an elephant's trunk curves, how a giraffe's neck bends, the stance of a hunting lion. These weren't mythical creatures, these were neighbours, part of the landscape, part of life. Some of the most striking paintings show something unexpected. People wearing elaborate costumes, or maybe not costumes, maybe ceremonial dress, figures with round heads, decorated with patterns. Some researchers call them Roundhead period paintings. They're the oldest figurative art in the region, dating to around 9,000 years ago. The round-headed figures appear in groups, dancing maybe, or performing ceremonies. Some hold objects, staffs or tools. Others have their arms raised, gesturing towards something. The scenes feel ritualistic, important, sacred somehow. Later paintings show different styles, more naturalistic. The cattle period art is incredibly detailed. You can identify specific cattle breeds, see individual markings, count the animals in a herd. The artist was skilled, trained, part of a tradition that valued accuracy. But it's not just cattle and wildlife. The painting shows scenes of daily life, women grinding grain, children playing, dogs running alongside hunters, people sitting together, talking, living, normal moments preserved in ochre and charcoal. The pigments came from the land. Red ochre from iron-rich rocks, yellow ochre from different minerals, white from kaolin clay, black from charcoal or manganese. The artist ground these materials into powder, mixed them with binders, animal fat probably, or plant resins, created paint that would last millennia. Some paintings show layers, earlier images underneath later ones. This means people return to these sites repeatedly, used them over generations, maybe over centuries. The rock shelters were important places, sacred sites possibly, or just good places to paint, protected from direct sun and rain, visible to anyone passing through the canyons. The location matters. Tassili Nadja sits at a crossroads. Ancient routes converged here. North-south trade paths, east-west migration corridors. People travelling through the region would have seen these paintings, recognised the animals, understood the scenes. The art communicated across time and distance. Some paintings show what might be boats, simple vessels, curved shapes with people inside, paddles visible. This suggests water, significant water, not just small pools, rivers maybe, or large lakes. Water deep enough and wide enough to need boats. Fish appear in some images too, large fish, the kind that need permanent water to survive, not seasonal puddles. The artist painted what they saw, what they caught, what they ate. The paintings are evidence, documentation, proof that water was everywhere. Around 5,000 years ago, the style changes again. The horse period begins. Horses appear in the paintings, people riding them, chariots pulled by horses. This marks a shift. Horses need different conditions than cattle. They're more mobile, better suited to drier grasslands. Their appearance suggests the climate was changing, becoming less humid, more seasonal. The final period shows camels. Camels are desert specialists. They tolerate drought, go days without water. Their appearance in the art marks the end, the transition to true desert, the Green Sahara dying. The paintings from this period are simpler, less detailed, the artistic tradition declining as the environment collapsed. Then the paintings stop, not gradually, abruptly. The rock shelters go silent. No new images appear. The artist left, or died out, or stopped painting. The reasons are lost. Modern analysis reveals more details. Archaeologists found tools near the painting sites, grinding stones for preparing pigments, brushes made from animal hair, palettes where colours were mixed. These weren't casual doodles. This was serious art, practiced craft, cultural expression. DNA analysis of ancient remains from the region shows connections to multiple populations, some related to modern Berber peoples, others to Nilo-Saharan groups, still others to populations that disappeared completely. The Tassili region was diverse, a meeting place, a crossroads where different cultures mixed. The paintings show this diversity. Different artistic styles side by side, different techniques, different subjects. Some paintings are naturalistic, others more abstract. Some focus on animals, others on people. The variety suggests multiple groups using the same spaces, sharing the same shelters, adding their own images to the collective gallery. Climate data from the region matches the paintings perfectly. Core samples from nearby lake beds show the same timeline. Wet conditions from 10,000 to 5,000 years ago, then rapid drying. The paintings and the geological evidence tell the same story, confirm each other, build a complete picture. But there's something haunting about Tassili Najjar specifically, the scale of it. 15,000 images, covering hundreds of square miles, multiple generations of artists, centuries of work, all documenting a world that vanished. Standing in those canyons today, the disconnect is profound. The paintings show green grasslands, herds of cattle, people swimming, children playing, life, abundance, comfort. But outside the rock shelters there's nothing, just rock and sand and heat. No water, no grass, no animals. The paintings are windows into a lost world, evidence that contradicts everything your eyes see. The rock shelters face different directions. Some catch morning light, others afternoon sun. The paintings glow at different times, colours shifting as light changes. The artists knew this, chose their locations carefully, placed images where they'd be seen best, where the light would bring them alive. Some shelters have acoustic properties, sound carries strangely, voices echo, clapping resonates. Maybe this mattered. Maybe ceremonies happened here. Music, storytelling, the paintings as backdrop to rituals we can only imagine. The preservation is remarkable. Most paintings remain vivid, colours bright, lines clear. The dry climate helped. No rain to wash pigments away. No freeze-thaw cycles to crack the rock. Just slow. Weathering. Gradual fading. But even after 9,000 years you can see what the artist intended, understand what they painted, feel what they felt. Tourism threatens the sites now. Footsteps wear away ancient floors. Touching damages pigments. Even breath adds moisture. Carbon dioxide accelerates decay. The painting survived 9,000 years of climate change. They might not survive modern visitors. UNESCO declared Tassili Najjar a World Heritage Site in 1982. Protection came late, some damage already done, but most paintings remain intact, hidden in remote canyons, protected by isolation, by the same desert that killed the world they depict. The paintings ask questions. Who were these artists? Did they know their world was ending? Did they paint to remember, to teach, to worship? Or just because humans make art? Because we always have? Because creating beauty is part of what makes us human? We'll never know for certain. The artist left no written records, no explanations, just images, thousands of images, watching over empty canyons, waiting for water that will never return. So what was life actually like for the people who painted those walls? Let's piece it together, bit by bit, from the traces they left behind. Not just the art, but the bones, the tools, the pollen, and even tiny bits of their food. It's like detective work, but the clues are scattered across a desert that used to be alive. Imagine stepping into that world. Not the world of endless sand, but one where you'd see green stretching out in every direction, grass bending in the wind, water shining under the sun, herds of animals moving, not just wild ones, but cattle owned by people. You'd hear birds calling, frogs croaking, fish splashing in shallow pools. It's hard to picture now, but the evidence is everywhere once you know how to look. Let's start with the animals. Archaeologists have dug up bones of cattle, goats, and sheep in places where today not even a blade of grass survives. These aren't wild animals, they're the remains of herds, domesticated, managed by people who depended on them for milk, meat, and hides. In some places, the bones are sorted by size and age, showing they were culled carefully. People knew how to manage their resources. They didn't just hunt and hope for the best, they planned. Nearby you find grinding stones, circular slabs worn smooth by years of use. They're called querns. People used them to grind grain, wild millet and sorghum at first, then later, grains they actually planted on purpose. The very act of grinding grain tells you something. It's not just hunting and gathering anymore, it's staying put, at least for a while, building storage pits, keeping food for lean times, sharing meals. You can actually see the fingerprints of these ancient people pressed into the clay of old hearths. Some fireplaces still hold chunks of burnt wood, even seeds that got dropped and charred. Scientists use those seeds to figure out what people ate. The list is long. Wild barley, wheat, sorghum and millet. Legumes like lentils and peas. They also ate fruits, figs and dates, collected from trees that no longer grow anywhere near the Sahara. Each seed is a clue. Each tells us about a world that was rich and varied. But it's not just food. The way they lived shows up in the layout of their camps. Some sites have stone circles that mark the spots where houses once stood. Not big buildings, but huts made of branches, grass or reeds. You can see the post holes, shallow pits where wooden poles once stood. Sometimes you find bits of matting, twisted fibres, woven tight, maybe used for sleeping or for sitting together in the shade. At some sites you find piles of shells, freshwater mussels, snails, even oyster shells, way out in the desert, hundreds of miles from the nearest coastline. These piles are called middens, ancient trash heaps, but they're more than garbage. They're records of feasts, of gatherings by the water's edge. Shells got cracked open, the meat eaten, then tossed aside. Some middens are as tall as a person. That means people came back year after year. The water must have lasted for generations. There are fish bones too, not just any fish. Big catfish, tilapia, perch. Some of them weighed over 40 pounds. These aren't the kind you find in puddles. They need deep, permanent water to thrive. People caught them with nets and wooden fish traps. Sometimes you find the remains of these traps, fragments of woven sticks shaped like funnels. Simple, but effective. Some rock art even shows people fishing, pulling nets from the water. But here's something really interesting. In the sand, researchers have found tiny beetle wings. These are water beetles, species that live only in clean, fresh water. Their presence means the lakes and rivers weren't just there for a season or two. They lasted long enough for entire ecosystems to develop. Frogs, turtles, crocodiles, even hippos, all living in what is today bone-dry desert. And what about the people themselves? We don't have their names, no written records, but we do have burials. In the middle of the desert, archaeologists uncovered graveyards, hundreds of skeletons buried with care, some wrapped in mats, others covered with ochre. Many graves contain simple jewellery, beads made of ostrich eggshell, tiny shells, or even carved stone. Necklaces, bracelets, anklets. These weren't just for show. Some seem to have been worn for years. The beads are worn smooth from rubbing against skin. People cared about how they looked, about marking special occasions, about honouring the dead. Some burials are truly moving. At a site called Gobero in Niger, a woman was found buried with her arms around two children. Maybe her own kids, maybe not. Nobody knows. But the care is obvious. Someone took the time to lay them together, to place grave goods beside them, food, beads, a few, tools, as if preparing them for a journey. This site is old, over 8,000 years, yet the emotion is timeless. Grief and love, frozen in sand. Other graves show social differences. Some people were buried with more jewellery, more tools, even with animal bones. Maybe they were leaders, maybe skilled hunters or important elders. You can see the beginnings of social structure. Not just everyone for themselves, but communities with roles and traditions. And the tools, there's a huge variety. Arrowheads made from flint and obsidian, scrapers for cleaning hides, bone needles for sewing together skins. Some tools are so finely made they almost look modern. Others are rough, but clearly meant for daily use. You find pestles and mortars for crushing seeds, awls for punching holes in leather, even fishing hooks carved from bone. Each tool tells a story about work, about daily life, about survival and comfort. Let's talk about clothing. It's hard to find direct evidence, but some rock paintings show people wearing skirts or tunics, hints of belts, maybe even head coverings. Some figures have jewellery painted on, necklaces, armbands, even earrings. These details aren't just decoration. They tell us how people saw themselves, how they wanted to be remembered. Dogs appear in the paintings too. Not just wild animals, but dogs with people, running beside hunters, sitting with families. Archaeologists have found dog bones at some sites, mixed in with human remains and animal bones. The dogs were part of daily life, helpers, companions, maybe even guards for the herds at night. And here's something else, the evidence of fire. Every camp had fireplaces, some had dozens. The ash layers are thick. Sometimes you find burnt bones, sometimes just charcoal. But you always find fire. It was the centre of life, for warmth, for cooking, for protection. Some sites have fire pits that were rebuilt over and over. People kept coming back to the same places, reusing the same shelters, the same spots to gather. What about children? We don't have stories, but we do see clues. Small footprints pressed in ancient mud. Toys made from bone and clay. Miniature pots. Tiny beads. Children learned by watching, by doing, by helping. They were part of the work, part of the play, part of the art. There's more evidence in the pollen. Scientists study ancient soil layers, looking for pollen grains. Each one is like a fingerprint. In layers dated to the humid periods, you find pollen from grasses, acacia trees, date palms, even oaks and olives, plants that can't survive in today's desert. Their pollen shows the land was green, full of shade and food and shelter. Some sites even show traces of disease. You find bones with signs of arthritis, healed fractures, and tooth decay. People lived hard lives, but they lived long enough to get old. Some skeletons show evidence of long-term care, broken bones that healed, signs of infections that eventually cleared up. This means people looked after each other. The sick and injured weren't just left behind. There's evidence of rituals too, not just in the paintings, but in the camps themselves. Arrangements of stones in circles, sometimes with animal bones placed just so. Some sites have piles of horns or skulls, collected and set apart. Maybe these were offerings, maybe symbols of clan identity, maybe just collections. We don't know for sure, but the care is obvious. And water technology, this is fascinating. In some places people dug wells, simple pits lined with stones to keep the walls from collapsing. They carried water in pottery jars. Some jars have handles shaped perfectly to fit a shoulder or a hand. There are even traces of ancient irrigation, small channels cut into the earth to direct water to gardens. They weren't farming on a huge scale, but they understood how to manage water, how to make the most of it when the rains came. The pottery itself tells stories. Shards of clay vessels decorated with patterns. Some show wavy lines, others simple dots or zigzags. The designs are more than just decoration. They help archaeologists link different groups. You find the same patterns hundreds of miles apart. That means people were moving, sharing ideas, maybe even trading goods. Trade is another piece of the puzzle. Obsidian blades have been found far from any natural source of obsidian. Ostrich eggshell beads turn up in places where ostriches didn't live. Even cowrie shells from the Indian Ocean have been discovered in ancient camps deep in the Sahara. These aren't accidents. They point to long-distance connections, networks of trade or at least exchange. People met each other, swapped goods, shared stories. There's evidence of music. Bone flutes, some with holes drilled in exact patterns. Simple drums made from hollowed logs or animal skins stretched over frames. You can imagine people gathering at night, singing, dancing, telling stories around the fire. The echoes of those nights are gone, but the instruments remain. And then there are the mysteries. Some sites contain strange objects, tiny carved figurines, shapes that don't match any known animal. Maybe they were toys, maybe idols, maybe just art for its own sake. Some stones are shaped like animals but have no obvious use. Others are painted with patterns that match nothing else in the region. These are puzzles, reminders that not everything fits neatly into our categories. DNA analysis of ancient bones shows something else: diversity. The people of the Green Sahara weren't all from one group. Some had genetic ties to North Africa, others to the Nile Valley, still others to sub-Saharan Africa. The Sahara was a crossroads. People moved through, mixed, settled, moved on. Cultures blended, languages changed. The region was never static. And climate. The evidence for change is everywhere. In some layers, you find thick mats of plant roots, traces of years with good rain. Then suddenly the roots disappear. The pollen shifts from trees to grass, then to desert shrubs, then to almost nothing. The lakes shrink. The fish bones vanish. The animal bones change. Fewer hippos, more gazelles, then finally mostly bones of goats and sheep. The world got drier little by little, then all at once. But before it ended, life was rich. People built communities, managed herds, fished, gathered, farmed, made art, buried their dead with care, traded with strangers, played music under the stars, laughed and fought and mourned and celebrated. Everything you'd expect from any human society. What strikes me most is how similar they were to us. The same needs, the same joys, the same urge to leave a mark. They painted their world not because they had to, but because they wanted to remember, wanted to show others what mattered, wanted to make beauty last, even as the world around them began to shift. And then, just as quickly as it began, this way of life faded. The lakes dried, the grass turned brown, the herds moved on or died out. People packed their things and left. Some headed north, others south or east. They carried their memories with them, but the land they knew was gone. This pastoral lifestyle, herding, fishing, gathering, making art, lasted for generations beyond counting. But nothing lasts forever. The paintings, the bones, the pollen, the tools, they're all that's left. Silent witnesses to a time when the Sahara was alive. This way of life lasted for thousands of years. Then everything changed. Let's dig into the big question. Why did the green world fade away? Why did grasslands, lakes and herds disappear, leaving only sand? People lived in the Sahara for ages, building their lives around water and grass. Nothing they did could have caused the land to change so much so quickly. The answer is bigger than any person or even any one group of people. It comes down to how Earth itself moves through space. Here's the thing. Our planet doesn't just spin in place. It tilts. It wobbles. It circles the sun in a path that's not quite a perfect circle. And those movements change over time in slow patterns that last tens of thousands of years. Scientists call these patterns Milankovitch cycles. The name comes from a Serbian scientist, Milutin Milankovic, who worked out the math in the early 1900s. But you don't need to know the equations. The main idea is simple. Earth's position in space changes, and that changes the climate. Let's break it down. There are three main cycles, all happening at once. First is the tilt. Earth spins on its axis, but that axis isn't straight up and down. It's tilted, like a spinning top leaning to one side. Right now, the tilt is about 23.5 degrees, but it doesn't stay the same. Over a period of about 41,000 years, the tilt shifts back and forth from about 22 to 24.5 degrees. That may not sound like much, but even a small change in the tilt can make a big difference in how much sunlight different parts of the world get, especially at the poles. When the tilt is greater, the seasons get more extreme. Summers are hotter, winters are colder. When the tilt is less, the difference between summer and winter is smaller. For North Africa, a bigger tilt means the region gets more sunlight during the summer. That extra energy can power stronger monsoon rains. More rain means more grass, more lakes, and a world full of life. The second cycle is the shape of Earth's orbit. Most people think our path around the sun is a perfect circle. It's not. It's a little stretched out like an oval. Scientists call this eccentricity. The orbit goes from being almost round to more oval-shaped and back again over about 100,000 years. When the orbit is more oval, the distance between Earth and the sun changes more during the year. That also changes how much energy the planet gets, and when. The third cycle is called precession. This one is a little trickier. Imagine a spinning top that starts to wobble as it slows down. Earth does something similar. The axis wobbles, tracing a circle over about 26,000 years. This changes the timing of the seasons. Right now, the northern hemisphere's summer happens when Earth is farthest from the sun. But thousands of years ago, summer happened when we were closest. That means summers were hotter, winters milder. All these cycles line up in different ways over time. Sometimes they work together to give North Africa extra strong summer sunlight. Sometimes they cancel each other out, making summers weaker. The key is the African monsoon, those seasonal rains that sweep up from the tropics. When the cycles line up just right, the monsoon pushes farther north than normal. It brings rain deep into the Sahara, turning desert into grassland. When the cycles shift, the monsoon pulls back and the land dries out. Scientists figured this out by looking at layers of mud on the ocean floor. Every year, winds blow dust off the Sahara and drop it into the Atlantic, but during wet periods there's less dust. More rain means plants hold the soil in place. The ocean mud records these wet and dry times year by year. When they match up the mud layers with the patterns of Earth's movement, they see a clear rhythm. Wet Saharas come and go in cycles every 20,000 years or so. The last big green phase started about 14,000 years ago and ended around 5,000 years ago. But there were others before that, and there will probably be more in the far future. Let's make this more concrete. Right now, North Africa sits on the edge, close to the tropics, but not quite in the zone where it rains all year. The only thing that brings real rain is the summer monsoon, a pattern of wind and storms that moves north and south with the seasons. During a normal year, the monsoon stops south of the Sahara. It waters the grasslands near the equator but leaves the desert dry. But when the cycles are lined up to give the northern hemisphere more summer sunlight, the whole system shifts north. The rains follow. Suddenly the Sahara gets wet. Lakes fill, rivers run, grass sprouts, and people move in to take advantage. But when the cycles shift again, the monsoon retreats, the rain stops, plants die, lakes shrink, animals leave. People have no choice but to follow the water or adapt to a harsher world. This isn't just theory. It's written in the land itself. You can see the old shorelines of vanished lakes. You can see riverbeds that haven't carried water in thousands of years. You can dig into the mud and find layers full of pollen from trees, followed by layers with nothing but dust. Here's another clue. Caves in North Africa hold ancient stalagmites, those slow-growing spikes of calcite that form when water drips from cave ceilings. Stalagmites grow only when it's wet enough for rainwater to seep underground. Scientists drill tiny cores out of these stalagmites and study the layers, like tree rings. They find thick bands from wet times, thin or missing bands from dry times. The dates match up with the patterns of Earth's cycles and the ocean mud. It all lines up. But this isn't just about North Africa. These cycles affect the whole planet. When the Sahara was wet, so were other deserts. The Arabian Peninsula, parts of India, even areas of Australia, all saw changes at the same times. That's because the engine driving these cycles is the sun and Earth's movement around it. The details are different in each place, but the pattern is global. So what actually happens step by step? Imagine the last time the Sahara turned green. The tilt of Earth was at its highest point. The orbit was just the right shape. The wobble of the axis made northern summers line up with our closest approach to the sun. Add it all together, and North Africa got a big boost of summer sunlight. The land heated up more than usual. Warm air rose, pulling in moist air from the south. The monsoon rains swept farther north than ever. Rain fell for months. Rivers formed. Lakes grew huge. Grass and trees took root. Animals followed. People followed the animals. For thousands of years this world thrived. But the cycles kept moving. The tilt decreased. The orbit shifted. The axis kept wobbling. Slowly the summer sunlight dropped off. The monsoon lost its power. Each year the rains didn't reach quite as far. Lakes shrank, rivers dried up. The land started to brown. People noticed. They could see the grass growing thinner, the herds moving out, the water holes getting smaller. They would have remembered stories from their grandparents, tales of bigger lakes, richer grass, more animals, but there was nothing they could do to stop the change. The drying wasn't always slow. Sometimes the climate shifted in sudden jumps. A few years of bad rains, a lake that dried up almost overnight, herds that vanished in a single season. People had to make quick decisions. Some packed up and moved, others tried to stick it out. Some may have fought over the last waterholes. The stories of those struggles are lost, but the traces remain. Abandoned camps, broken pottery, empty villages. We're not talking about a simple, gentle drying. In some places the change was fast enough to leave stranded fish in shrinking lakes. Trees died and never grew back. Even the winds changed, picking up dust from the bare ground and blowing it across continents. Some of that dust settled on glaciers far away, carrying the signature of the Sahara with it. Now, you might wonder, if these cycles keep repeating, couldn't people have just waited for the rain to return? The trouble is the cycles are long. The wet periods last maybe 5,000 to 10,000 years. The dry spells last even longer. For anyone living through the change, it would have felt permanent. Once the grass was gone, it didn't come back in a lifetime, not even in many lifetimes. Let's look at some numbers. The last green phase started around 14,000 years ago. The rains reached their peak about 9,000 years ago. By 5,000 years ago, the desert had mostly returned. That's a span of 9,000 years from start to finish, but the worst of the drying took place in just 1 or 2 centuries. That's within the memory of a few generations. Imagine your grandparents talking about lakes that no longer exist, or herds that nobody has seen in living memory. That's how fast it happened. And it wasn't just the Sahara. The Nile changed too. When the Sahara was wet, the Nile's flow was stronger, fed by rain from a wide area. As the desert returned, the river's headwaters shrank. People living along the Nile had to change how they farmed, how they built, even how they prayed for rain. The shift didn't just affect one region. It sent people moving in all directions, looking for better land. Some headed north toward the Mediterranean, others went south, following the rivers. Some went east, into the Nile Valley. Wherever they went, they carried memories of a lost world. This is the power of the Milankovitch cycles. They shape our world in ways nobody can control. When you look at a map today, with the Sahara drawn as a vast yellow emptiness, it's easy to think it's always been that way. But the cycles remind us that change is the rule, not the exception. What is desert today was once grassland. What is grassland now might be desert again someday. Let's talk about how scientists actually figured all this out. It started with clues from rocks and mud, but the real breakthrough came from ice. In places like Greenland and Antarctica, snow falls year after year and never melts. It builds up in thick layers. Each layer traps tiny bubbles of air, dust, and even pollen. Scientists drill deep cores through the ice and study the layers. They find patterns of dust that match the Sahara's dry spells. They find shifts in greenhouse gases that line up with the wet and dry cycles. It's all connected. Ocean cores tell the same story. The mud on the seafloor off West Africa holds tiny fossils of plants and animals. Some lived in fresh water, others in salt. The mix changes as the climate does. When North Africa was wet, the mud is full of pollen from trees and grass. When it was dry, the mud is all dust. The dates line up with the cycles of tilt, wobble, and orbit. Even ancient DNA from plants and animals tells the same tale. Genetic studies show that some species, like hippos and crocodiles, once lived much farther north than they do now. Their bones turn up in places that are now totally dry. Their DNA hints at old populations that were separated when the land dried up. It's another piece of the puzzle. You can even see the cycles written in the stars. Ancient astronomers noticed that the sky changed slowly over lifetimes. The position of the sun at the solstices shifted ever so slightly, some ancient. Some buildings, like the temples in Egypt, were built to line up with the sunrise on special days. Over centuries, those alignments drifted thanks to precession. The people may not have known about Milankovitch cycles, but they felt their effects. So what does all this mean for us? For one thing, it's a reminder that Earth is always changing. Nothing stays the same forever. The cycles keep turning, no matter what. For ancient people, the change was a disaster. They lost their homes, their food, their way of life. But they also adapted. They moved, learned new skills, built new societies. Some became farmers along the Nile. Others wandered farther, bringing ideas and memories with them. It's easy to feel small in the face of these cycles. They're bigger than any city, any empire, any single life. But they're also a part of what makes Earth special. The cycles are slow, but their effects are huge. They shape where people can live, what animals can survive, what plants can grow. If you stand in the Sahara today and think about what used to be there, lakes, grass, herds, people, you're seeing the result of a dance between Earth and the sun. It's a dance that's been going on for millions of years. The green world came and went, not because of anything people did, but because the planet itself changed its tune. And here's something to think about. The cycles will keep going. Someday, far in the future, the rains may return. Grass may cover the sand again. People may walk across land that seems empty now. But for now, the Sahara is a desert, shaped by forces as old as the Earth itself. But here's the scary part. The change wasn't slow. So how does a world flip from green to desert in a human lifetime? What tips the balance? That's where things get tricky, and honestly a little unsettling. Because the real tipping point for the Sahara wasn't some gentle fade. It was more like a trapdoor. One moment, there's grass everywhere. The next, the land starts to dry out. Not gradually, but in jumps. Sudden, sharp, and for anyone living through it, probably terrifying. Scientists wanted to know, what actually causes these sharp drops? Why doesn't the land just get a little drier each year until there's only sand? Turns out the answer has a lot to do with feedback loops. Little changes that snowball into huge shifts. Let's break that down. Imagine a rainy year. Grass grows thick. The ground stays cool and moist because the plants shade it. When the sun beats down, the grass keeps the soil from baking to dust. The roots hold the earth together. When it rains again, the water sinks in instead of running off. That's a stable, self-reinforcing system. But now, imagine the monsoon weakens just a bit. Maybe the tilt of Earth drops by 0.5 degree. That year, the rain doesn't reach quite as far north. The grass at the edge starts to thin out. Bare patches appear. Sun hits the soil directly. The ground heats, up faster and dries out. When the next rain comes, it runs off instead of soaking in. Seeds don't sprout as easily. Without grass, the wind picks up loose dust and blows it away. The bare ground turns hotter, making it even harder for rain to bring life back. That's a feedback loop, and it runs in both directions. More grass means more rain and cooler ground. Less grass means less rain and hotter ground. Here's where it gets wild. Once the grass cover drops past a certain point, everything speeds up. The land loses its ability to hold water. The few plants left die off quickly. Animals move away. The soil blows away, leaving only rock and sand. It's like losing the keystone in an arch. Take out enough, and the whole thing collapses. That's why the change can be so sudden. One season things look okay. 5 years later, the world has changed completely. Scientists call this a non-linear shift. That just means small triggers can cause a giant result. It's like sand piling up on a table. Grain by grain, nothing happens. Then suddenly the whole pile slides off. For the Sahara, the tipping point came when the combined effects of less rain, hotter summers, and dying plants all lined up. The system flipped. This isn't just theory. Researchers have built computer models to test these ideas. They feed in the past patterns of sunlight, rainfall, and plant growth. What comes out matches the real-world evidence. The models show that once plant cover drops below about 30%, the land can't bounce back, even if the rain returns for a few years. The desert takes over. Let's look at some real-life clues this happened. In the centre of the Sahara, there's a place called the Fezzan Basin. Archaeologists found ancient lake beds there. The mud contains pollen from oak and pine trees, along with grass seeds and even frog bones. Then, all of a sudden, the pollen record stops. No more tree pollen, no more grass, just dust. The change happened in less than 2 centuries. That's 2 or 3 generations. Grandparents might have seen green fields as children, only to watch them vanish by the time they grew old. Another example is Lake Yoa in Chad. It's one of the few lakes that survive from the old green world. Scientists drilled deep into the mud at its bottom. They found layers packed with pollen from water-loving plants, along with shells from snails that need fresh water. But then, about 4,500 years ago, the layers change. The pollen from reeds and trees drops off. Suddenly the mud is full of dust and wind-blown sand. The lake didn't vanish overnight, but its world changed completely. The animals and plants that depended on those wetlands disappeared almost at once. Rock art tells the same story in a different way. The oldest paintings show hippos, crocodiles, and huge herds of grazing animals. Then, over a few hundred years, the subjects change. Hunters draw smaller groups. The animals shrink in number and variety. By the time the region is fully dry, the only animals left in the art are camels, a species that thrives in dry places and didn't even arrive until much later. So what actually causes these feedback loops to kick in? It's not just the rain. It's about the land's memory, how long it can remember being wet. Grasslands and woodlands have a kind of inertia. If they're healthy, they can survive a few bad years. But if the bad years stack up, the system loses its memory. The soil dries so much that even a good rain can't bring back what was lost. Seeds are gone. Roots are gone. The ecosystem can't recover. There's another piece to this puzzle. Dust. When plant cover disappears, the Sahara becomes the world's biggest source of airborne dust. Each year the winds lift up more than 100 million tons of fine particles and blow them across the Atlantic. Some of that dust ends up in the Caribbean, even in the Amazon rainforest. The dust carries minerals that fertilize far off lands, but it also blocks sunlight and cools the ocean surface, changing weather patterns. The desert doesn't just affect itself, it changes the world. Scientists can track this dust in ice cores from Greenland. They find layers rich in Saharan dust at exactly the same times the desert expanded. That dust tells a story of rapid change. The land didn't just dry out, it became a giant engine, pumping particles into the sky, shifting weather on a global scale. But let's get back to the people living there. What did they see? How did they respond? Archaeologists have found abandoned villages at the edges of dried lakes, pottery left behind, grinding stones scattered as if people just walked away. In some places they find layers of ash, maybe from fires set to clear land, or maybe from people burning the last brush for fuel. The suddenness of the change is written in these sites. There's no long, slow decline. One layer is full of life, the next is empty. Even the animals tell us about the tipping point. Bones from fish, hippos, and crocodiles are found in layers right up to the very end. Then, nothing. No gradual shrinkage in size or number, just a sharp boundary between a world full of water and one ruled by dust. What about the weather itself? Scientists believe that once the plant cover broke down, the local climate shifted quickly. Without grass and trees, the land reflected more sunlight. That made the air above it hotter and drier. The monsoon, already growing weaker, lost its push. Rain clouds formed farther and farther south. It's like the region lost its grip on the rain. The system tumbled into a new state, locked in by the feedback between land and sky. There's a theory called hysteresis. It means that once a system flips from one state to another, it doesn't snap back easily. For the Sahara, this means that once grasslands turned to desert, even a return of rain wasn't enough to bring back the old world. The land needed more than just water. It needed seeds, roots, animals to move them around. By then, those things were gone. The door had closed. Now, here's something that might surprise you. There were a few brief wet bursts after the main drying. Scientists call these humid pulses. For a few decades or centuries, rain returned in some places. Small lakes filled up again. People came back, tried to farm or herd animals, but the land never fully recovered. The feedback loops had done their work. Even with water, the desert held on. This tells us something important. The Sahara isn't just the result of bad luck with rain. It's the outcome of a system that can tip, and once it does, it's hard to reverse. The lesson isn't only about the past. It's about how nature can flip from one state to another, sometimes for good. Let's think about what it might have felt like to live through this. Imagine growing up in a green land, hearing stories of how things used to be even better. Your parents farm or herd cattle. The lakes are full. Birds fill the air. Then you start to notice changes. The grass is thinner. Water holes dry up earlier each year. Animals leave and don't come back. Maybe there's a year when the rains don't come at all. The next year, you hope it'll be better. But it isn't. Plants don't grow. People argue over the last patches of green. Some families pack up and leave, hoping to find a better life elsewhere. Others stay, trying to make do. Maybe you hear stories about far-off places where the land is still good. Maybe you try to reach them, but the old world is gone. This isn't just a story from one place. The pattern shows up in other ancient societies. In Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, irrigation allowed people to grow crops in a dry climate. But when the land was pushed too hard, or when the climate shifted, the system broke down. Salt built up in the soil. Crops failed. People moved away. In the American Southwest, ancient pueblos stand empty after long droughts. In Central America, cities of the Maya were abandoned after rainfall patterns changed. The Sahara story is special because the change happened on such a huge scale. We're talking about a space bigger than the continental United States flipping from green to brown. Not slowly, but in a burst, within the memory of people who lived there. The clues lie in every layer of dust, every abandoned lake bed, every cave painting that ends with the arrival of the desert. It's tempting to think of deserts as places that have always been empty, but the truth is, they hold memories of lost worlds. The Sahara is a graveyard of old rivers, lost lakes, vanished forests. Even now, after thousands of years without rain, the ghosts of those green times remain. You just have to know where to look. So, was there any warning? Could people have seen it coming? That's a hard question. Modern scientists have satellites, computer models, and global records. But ancient people relied on memory and tradition. Maybe they noticed the rains growing weaker. Maybe they tried new ways of farming, or moved their herds to higher ground. Maybe they prayed, hoping the old gods would bring water back. But in the end, the tipping point came, and there was no going back. Here's what I find fascinating. The story of the Sahara isn't just a tragedy. It's a lesson about how fragile the balance of life can be. How small changes add up, until suddenly, everything is different. We see echoes of this in the world today. Places that were once fertile are drying out. Forests turn to grasslands, grasslands to desert. The same feedback loops are at work, the same tipping points waiting in the background. But there's also hope in the story. Even after the desert took over, people adapted. They found new ways to live. Some became nomads, moving with the seasons. Others built civilizations along the Nile where the river still flowed. The memory of the Green Sahara lived on, in stories, in art, in the bones of animals buried deep under the sand. Scientists keep searching for more evidence. Every year new discoveries turn up. A hidden riverbed found with radar, an ancient tool made from wood that only grows in wet places, fossil pollen from a tree that hasn't grown in North Africa for ages. Each find adds another piece to the puzzle. We may never know exactly what it felt like to stand on the edge of that tipping point, but the clues are there, waiting in the dust. The Sahara is still changing even now. It grows and shrinks with the seasons. Sometimes, after a rare storm, wildflowers bloom for a few weeks, painting the sand with colour. It's a reminder that the land remembers even after all these years, and the cycles aren't done. The forces that flipped the Sahara from green to gold are still at work. One day, maybe far in the future, the rains will return. Rivers will flow again, people will come back to find a world reborn. Until then, the desert holds its secrets, silent and patient. But the story doesn't end with the sand. The dead Sahara still shapes our world. The next chapter is about legacy, how a vanished green world left marks that reach all the way into our own lives. The Sahara isn't just a desert, it's a force. Even after all the green vanished, that huge sea of sand didn't just sit quietly, it changed the world around it, and not just by sending dust across the ocean. The old, living Sahara left a legacy. Its memory lives on in landscapes, in climate, and even in the lives of people far away. Let's break it down, one piece at a time. First, think about the land itself. Under all that sand, the bones of the old world are still there. Ancient riverbeds lie hidden, wind across hundreds of miles. They don't carry water anymore, but they still shape the way the wind moves the sand above. Modern satellites looking down from space can find these river channels, snaking under the dunes. Some are as wide as highways. They twist and branch, showing where water once flowed for thousands of years. In some places, these old rivers still matter. When rare storms hit, water sometimes collects along the old paths, shaping brief lakes or making the ground softer. Nomads know these places. They dig shallow wells to reach water trapped deep below. Even in the driest years, the memory of the rivers gives life to people who understand the land. There's another layer of the story, the fossils, not just bones of whales or crocodiles. There are forests buried under the sand. Long ago, trees grew thick and tall. When the climate shifted, the trees died and were covered by dust. Their wood turned to stone, petrified forests hidden for ages. Sometimes, after a strong windstorm, chunks of petrified wood appear on the surface. They look like broken logs, but they're heavy as rock. In a place where nothing grows now, these stone trees are proof there was once shade and life. Fossilized seeds and leaves also turn up. Each one is a clue about what used to grow there. Scientists have even found pollen from plants that now only live in Europe or deep in Central Africa. These fossils are like a time capsule, showing how different the Sahara once was. Let's move to the lakes. Some old lake beds are so big you could fit whole countries inside them. Lake Megachad, for example, covered an area bigger than all of California. Today there's only a tiny lake left. But the old shoreline is still visible from the air, a faint line marking where water once lapped the land. The mud at the bottom holds more than just pollen and shells. It keeps the chemical fingerprints of ancient water. By studying the minerals in those layers, scientists can tell how salty the water was, how often it dried up, and what kinds of plants grew nearby. Layers rich in certain chemicals match up with periods of heavy rain. Layers full of dust and salt match with drought. These patterns are like a diary, recording every major shift. But the Sahara's story doesn't stop at its edge. That dust blowing off the desert travels farther than you might think. Every year, winds pick up more than 100 million tons of fine sand and dirt. Most of it heads west, across the Atlantic Ocean. Some settles into the sea, but a surprising amount lands in South America, especially in the Amazon rainforest. It sounds strange, but it's true. The Amazon depends on dust from the Sahara to stay healthy. The soil in the rainforest is old and poor in nutrients, but Saharan dust is rich in minerals like phosphorus. When it lands, it acts like fertilizer. Trees, vines, and all kinds of plants use those minerals to grow. Without the dust, the Amazon wouldn't be the same. In a real way, the dead land of Africa feeds the living forests of South America. The Sahara's dust shapes more than just the Amazon. It changes weather patterns too. When huge clouds of dust float over the Atlantic, they block sunlight. That cools the ocean surface. Sometimes this can weaken hurricanes, which need warm water to form. In other years, the dust actually helps storms by giving them tiny particles to build around. Scientists track the dust using satellites, watching it drift for thousands of miles. There are even times when the dust colours sunsets in the Caribbean, turning the sky orange and red. Now, let's talk about people. When the land flipped from green to dry, it forced whole cultures to move. This wasn't just a slow trickle. In some places, whole villages left almost overnight. The people didn't just disappear. They migrated, carrying their knowledge, languages, and traditions with them. Many headed toward the Nile, where the river still flowed no matter what happened in the desert. Others moved south into what's now the Sahel, a band of grasslands below the Sahara. Some followed old riverbeds, hoping to find water. These migrations changed the shape of Africa. New communities grew up along the Nile. Over time, these became the roots of ancient Egypt. This is one of the big surprises. The collapse of the Green Sahara may have helped spark the rise of some of history's first great civilizations. Before the desert expanded, people in North Africa were mostly herders and fishers. They lived in small groups, scattered over a wide area, but when the land dried up, thousands of people crowded into the Nile Valley. The river became the only source of water for miles around. To survive, people had to work together. They dug canals, managed floods, and stored grain. Small villages joined into larger towns. Towns grew into cities. Cities became kingdoms. In a way, the Sahara's death forced people to invent new ways of living. The old green world ended, but in its place something new appeared. The same thing happened on the desert's southern edge. As people moved south, they brought their cattle, their farming skills, and their stories. They mixed with local groups. Over time, new cultures formed, some of which still exist today. Languages shifted, religions blended, and new ways of life began. The desert didn't just erase the past, it set the stage for the future. There's another legacy, one that's less obvious, but just as important. The Sahara became a barrier. Once the desert locked into place, it split Africa in two. North and south developed differently. Trade routes had to work around the sand. Ideas, goods, and even diseases moved more slowly between regions. This division shaped the history of the entire continent. You can still see the effects today in language, culture, and even in the foods people eat. Now, let's zoom out. The Sahara isn't the only place where climate shift left a mark. Around the same time, other areas faced big changes. The Arabian Peninsula dried out, and people moved to the coasts or up into mountains. In Central Asia, grasslands became drier, pushing people toward river valleys. These shifts happened again and again, each time changing the way people lived. But the Sahara's transformation is the biggest, most dramatic example. So what about animals? The desert's birth didn't just push people to new places, it forced animals to move or die out. Some species, like elephants and giraffes, managed to survive in pockets of green along the desert's edge. Others disappeared from North Africa entirely. Crocodiles, once common in lakes and rivers, retreated to the Nile or vanished. Fish that swam in ancient lakes went extinct when the water dried up. Even today, you can find animal bones in places where nothing has lived for thousands of years. They're like ghosts from a lost world, reminders of how quickly things can change. Let's talk about the legacy written in rock art. After the land turned dry, the kinds of animals in the art changed. Early paintings show hippos, cattle, and wild antelope. Later ones show camels and donkeys, animals suited for dry deserts. Even the style of art shifted. The bright reds and yellows of the old paintings faded to dull browns, made from minerals found in the sand. Some artists scratched simple outlines instead of painting full scenes. This wasn't just a change in materials, it was a sign that life itself was getting harder. The art is a record of loss, but also of adaptation. One surprising piece of evidence comes from DNA. Scientists have studied ancient bones and teeth from people who lived in the Sahara before and after the Big Shift. The results show that as the desert spread, people mixed with new groups, both north and south of the sand. Today, some North African populations carry genes that trace back to ancient farmers from the Middle East, as well as to groups from sub-Saharan Africa. The desert acted like both a wall and a bridge, depending on the time and place. Let's not forget the stories. In many cultures around North Africa, there are old tales of a land where water was everywhere and life was easy. Some legends speak of lost rivers, hidden lakes, and forests that vanished overnight. For a long time, people thought these were just myths, but now modern science shows there's truth behind them. The memories of the wet Sahara lasted longer than the land itself. People passed down stories, songs, and even place names that remember a world that's long gone. So what about today? The Sahara isn't done shaping lives. Its dust still crosses the ocean every year. When there's a big dust storm, air quality drops in places as far away as Florida and the Caribbean. Sometimes the dust even makes its way to Europe, turning rainwater brown and coating cars with a fine red powder. Farmers in Spain and Italy have learned to expect these blood rains every so often. Even in our modern world, the desert leaves its mark. But the biggest legacy might be the lesson it teaches us. The Sahara shows how quickly things can change. Land full of lakes and forests can become empty desert in just a few lifetimes. The balance between life and death is thin. Small shifts, just a little less rain, just a few years of bad luck, can flip a landscape from green to gold. And once that happens, it's hard to go back. Here's where it gets really interesting. Scientists have found evidence that the Sahara could become green again someday. The same forces that once brought rain could return. Earth's tilt and orbit are always changing. In a few thousand years, the monsoon might shift north again. Rain could fall, rivers could flow, and the desert could bloom. It's happened before. But even if the climate changes, the land may not recover unless the right plants and animals are there to help. The feedback loops go both ways. If there are no seeds, no roots, no animals to spread them, the land might stay barren even with more rain. People are already trying small experiments. In a few places along the desert's southern edge, farmers are planting trees and grasses to hold the soil. Some projects try to rebuild old wetlands by digging channels and trapping water. It's slow, hard work. Most of the Sahara is still dry, but after rare storms, wildflowers sometimes burst into bloom. For a few weeks the sand turns pink and yellow. It's a reminder that life can return even after centuries of silence. One last legacy. This one's about curiosity. The Sahara draws scientists, explorers, and dreamers from all over the world. Every year new discoveries are made. A hidden cave with ancient art, a fossilized tree buried under a dune, a new species of fish found only in a single desert spring. The desert is full of secrets. It challenges what we think we know about the past. It shows us how fragile and powerful nature can be. What strikes me most is how much of the old world is still there, just waiting to be found. The rivers, the forests, the stories. They aren't gone, just hidden. The Sahara is a reminder that landscapes can change, but the memory of what they once were can last for ages. It's not just a graveyard of lost worlds. It's a library, holding the records of change, survival, and hope, and that's the true legacy. The Sahara teaches us to pay attention to the signs of change, to respect the balance of a life on Earth, and to remember that even the harshest places were once full of water, grass, and dreams. But all this talk about land and dust leads to another big question. The people. How did they survive? What happened to the millions who called this place home? That's where the story turns next. Imagine waking up one morning in a world that feels just a little off. The air is drier. The grass at the edge of your camp is yellow instead of green. The pond where you catch fish is shrinking bit by bit. It's not a disaster yet, but something is different. Maybe you hope the rains will come back. Maybe you convince yourself it's just a bad season. But deep down, things are changing. That change kept going. Year after year, the land dried out more. Waterholes vanished. Herds wandered further, searching for grass. Some animals didn't come back. The sound of frogs at night faded away. The air filled with dust on windy days. People started to worry. You could see it in the way they watched the sky, hoping for rain. You could see it in the way families packed up their belongings and left, heading for places that might still have water. Now try to picture this on a huge scale. Not just one family or one village. Hundreds of groups, thousands of people, all moving, all searching for a new home. You're looking at one of the biggest migrations in human history. The old world was gone. The only choice was to move or die. This wasn't a neat single event. It happened over generations. Some families left early, sensing trouble. Others held out until the very end, hoping things would turn around. But the pattern was the same. As the land dried up, people left. And they didn't leave empty-handed. They carried memories, skills, and even seeds with them. They brought knowledge of how to herd cattle, how to fish, how to build shelters out of reeds and mud. They brought stories of the lost lakes and forests. Where did they go? For most, the answer was simple. They followed the water. Some turned south toward the grasslands below the desert. Others headed east, toward the valley of the Nile. That river was different. It never dried up completely. It kept flowing, even when everything else failed. It was a ribbon of green in a sea of brown. If you could reach it, you had a chance. Let's dig into what this migration meant. It wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation. The people who left the drying Sahara didn't just slip quietly into new lands. Their arrival changed everything. They brought new tools, new ways of thinking, and new problems to solve. They met other groups, already living there. Sometimes there was conflict. Sometimes there was cooperation. Cultures blended. New languages formed. Old traditions took on new meanings. Here's an example. As people crowded into the Nile Valley, they had to invent new ways to live close together. In the old days, when there was space and plenty of food, small groups could spread out. Now, with so many people and so little land, they had to cooperate. They learned to dig canals to carry water from the river to their fields. They figured out how to build dikes to stop floods from destroying crops. They started storing grain for hard times. That meant someone had to keep track of who owned what. Someone had to organize building projects. Someone had to settle arguments. Little by little, these changes added up. Small villages grew into towns. Towns joined together into something bigger. The first steps toward government appeared. Rules, leaders, and systems for sharing resources. None of this happened overnight. But the pressure of the migration pushed people in that direction. Let's talk about the scale. How many people moved? It's hard to put a number on it. But some scientists think the Sahara, back when it was green, could have supported a few million people. That's not a small number. When the rain stopped, most of them had to find a new home. The Nile Valley, narrow as it is, became the main destination. At its widest, the area you could actually farm or live on was only a few miles across, but it stretched for hundreds of miles from what's now Sudan up to the Mediterranean Sea. Imagine that river valley filling up, family after family arriving with their animals and belongings, each one looking for a patch of land, a way to start over. The pressure must have been intense. Every bit of fertile ground mattered. Every drop of water counted. People had to work together or fight for what they needed. But it wasn't just about crowding in. The newcomers brought ideas. Farming techniques from the old grasslands, ways of herding cattle, and even different kinds of animals. Some may have brought crops that had never been grown in Egypt before. Archaeologists have found remains of grains and animals in the Nile Valley that first appeared right after these migrations. That's a clue. It shows that the people who moved in didn't just blend into the background. They changed the way things worked. Here's another angle. The migration didn't just go east. Some people went south into what's called the Sahel. This is the band of grassland below the Sahara. It's not as green as the old Sahara was, but it has enough rain to support herding and farming. Over time, these groups mixed with people already living there. The result was a melting pot. New languages developed. Old ways of life changed. Some groups became famous for their cattle herding skills. Others turned to farming millet and sorghum. This mixing of people sparked changes that still matter today. You can see traces of it in the languages spoken across Africa, in the way villages are organised, even in the music and art. The echoes of that ancient migration are still there, if you know how to look. Let's slow down and look at the evidence. How do we know all this happened? The main clues come from archaeology and genetics. Archaeologists dig up pottery, tools, and even old trash heaps. They can tell when new styles appear, or when certain types of food start showing up in the record. For example, pottery styles that first appeared in the central Sahara suddenly show up along the Nile, right at the time the desert is drying out. It's like a trail of breadcrumbs. Genetics tells a similar story. Modern DNA studies show that people living in North Africa today carry genes from groups that originally came from both the Sahara and further south. There's even evidence of mixing with people from the Middle East, probably carried in by newcomers who followed. The Nile upstream. It's like a fingerprint showing how populations blended over time. But the story isn't just about people moving, it's about survival. The old ways didn't work anymore. People had to adapt or fail. Some skills became useless. You can't fish in a lake that's dried up. You can't herd cattle where there's no grass. But other skills became more important. Knowing how to dig a well, knowing how to spot wild plants that survive in harsh conditions, knowing how to work with other groups, even if you don't speak the same language. This is where invention comes in. When life gets hard, people get creative. Some of the earliest examples of irrigation, bringing water to crops using channels and ditches, show up in Egypt right after this migration. So do new ways of building houses, using mud bricks instead of reeds. Even the first written records appear not long after. It's no coincidence. When lots of people come together and there's pressure to survive, new ideas spread fast. Let's reflect for a second. Why does this matter? Why spend so much time talking about an ancient migration? Here's the thing. This was one of those moments when the world changed direction. The birth of Egyptian civilization, the growth of new cultures in Africa, even some of the patterns we see in language and trade today. All of it links back to this movement of people away from the dying land. It's a reminder that climate isn't just background noise, it shapes history. When the land dries up, people move. When people move, the world changes. Sometimes what looks like the end of the world for one group is the beginning of something new for another. You might be wondering, was it all smooth? Did everyone just blend and get along? Of course not. There were struggles. Archaeologists have found signs of conflict, villages burned down, weapons broken in battle, mass graves that hint at violence. When resources are tight, people fight. But there's also evidence of sharing, trading goods, mixing styles of pottery, marrying into new groups. Human history is never simple. There's another interesting detail. As the Sahara dried, some animals went with the people. Not just cattle and goats, but wild animals too. Some groups tried to keep herds of wild antelope. Others carried seeds from plants they relied on for food or medicine. This moving of plants and animals changed the landscape in their new homes. Crops that once grew only in the Sahara started to show up along the Nile and further south in Africa. Let's zoom in on the science for a minute. How do researchers figure out where people moved and when? They use several tools. Radiocarbon dating lets them tell how old a bone or piece of charcoal is. Isotope analysis can show what kind of food someone ate, or what kind of water they drank. Together, these clues build a timeline. You can see when people switched from eating mostly fish to mostly grain, or when the bones of Saharan cattle start appearing in places far from their original home. Think about the scale again. This wasn't just a local problem. As the climate shifted, the whole system changed. The rivers that once flowed across the desert dried up. The lakes turned to dust. The old trade routes vanished. People had to invent new ways to travel, to communicate, to survive in a world that kept shifting under their feet. And it wasn't just Africa. Similar things happened in other parts of the world. When the Arabian Peninsula dried out, people moved to the coasts or into mountains. In Central Asia, herders followed the rivers as the grasslands faded. But the story in North Africa is especially clear. The Sahara turned from a lush land into a desert, and the people didn't just give up. They moved, adapted, and built something new. Let's talk about the emotional side. Imagine what it must have felt like to leave your home, to walk away from lakes and grasslands knowing you might never see them again, to say goodbye to the graves of your ancestors, to the places your family had lived for generations. That loss would shape you. It would shape your children and their children too. The stories they told would remember a time when things were better, when the world was full of water and life. Over time, those stories became part of the new cultures, myths about lost lands, songs about rivers that no longer flow. Even today, you can find echoes of those memories in folk tales and place names. The past is never really gone. It lingers just below the surface. Let's look at the big picture. What did this migration set in motion? Along the Nile, it led to the rise of one of the world's first great civilizations. Writing, art, building, and science flourished. In the Sahel, new cultures grew up, blending old and new ways of life. Trade routes formed, linking distant lands. Over time, these connections reached all the way across Africa and beyond. But there's another lesson here. The story of the Great Exodus from the Sahara shows how humans respond to crisis. When faced with disaster, we don't just sit and wait. We move, we change, we find new ways to live. Sometimes that means leaving almost everything behind. Sometimes it means reinventing what it means to be a community. Here's what I find fascinating. The people who left the dying land didn't just survive. They carried the seeds of new worlds with them. They were forced to adapt, and that pressure sparked new ideas. The collapse of one way of life created space for something new to grow. But it's not all happy endings. The desert that replaced the old green land became a barrier. It split Africa in two. It made life harder for those left behind and for those who tried to cross it. The cost of survival was high, but the changes set in motion are still with us. So next time you look at a map of Africa, trace your finger along the Nile. Imagine it packed with families, animals, boats, and dreams. Picture the grasslands at its edge, filling up with new arrivals. Hear the mix of languages, the clash of old and new ideas. That's the legacy of the Great Migration. It's a story about endings, but also about beginnings, about loss, but also about hope. The world changed, and so did the people. They didn't just vanish. They moved, adapted, and built the foundation for everything that came next. And where did they end up? The Nile. When people talk about the birth of Egypt, they often picture pyramids, pharaohs, and golden treasures. But the real story starts much earlier, in a world that looked nothing like the Egypt we imagine today. It begins with a river, a flood, and a mix of people who had no idea they were about to change history. Let's set the scene. The Nile Valley, right after the waves of migration from the drying Sahara. The river is still wild. Each year it swells with summer rains from far to the south. When the water rises, it spills over the banks, flooding fields, leaving behind dark, rich mud. This is what makes the Nile special. No other river in the region could offer this kind of steady, predictable life. But it's not just about water, it's about timing. The new arrivals from the grasslands show up with their herds and their skills. They know how to manage cattle, how to store grain, how to work together when things get tough. The people already living along the Nile have their own ways. They're used to the rhythms of the river. Some fish, some farm, some hunt in the marshes. Suddenly these groups have to share space. It's not always easy. The first challenge is simple: survival. The Nile is a narrow green strip with desert on both sides. If you look at a satellite photo of Egypt today, you'll see it. A thin line of green, winding north to the Mediterranean. Everything else is brown. That narrow zone is where all the action happens. It's where the people settle, build homes, and try to carve out a living. Now think about what happens when too many people want the same thing. Land becomes precious. Water is everything. There isn't enough space for everyone to spread out. Some families settle close to the river, others push into the marshlands. Fights break out. Arguments over whose cattle get the best grass, whose fields get the most water. But here's where something important starts to happen. The pressure forces people to cooperate. Maybe you can't fight your neighbours forever. Maybe you realise you need each other. Someone builds a canal. Someone else organises a hunt. People start trading favours, goods, and eventually ideas. Over time, these small acts of teamwork add up. People who used to live in scattered huts start clustering together. Villages form. Instead of everyone doing their own thing, groups start working on big projects, digging ditches, piling up earth to protect homes from floods, pooling resources to build better storage. It's not government yet, but it's the beginning of organised life. Archaeologists have dug up early villages from this time. They find houses made of mud brick, built close together, storage pits filled with grain, broken pots and bones from feasts. Some sites show signs of planning, streets laid out in straight lines, houses facing the same direction. That's not an accident. It points to leaders, even if we don't know their names. But it's not just about buildings. The real magic is in how people start thinking differently. When you live in a small group, you solve problems face to face. When you live in a village of hundreds, you need rules. You need someone to settle arguments, someone to organize work, someone to keep track of who owns what. These are the first steps toward government. And here's something else. When groups blend, so do their traditions. The newcomers from the old Sahara bring their own ways of doing things they have different words for. Cattle, different songs, different ways of honouring the dead. The locals have their own customs. Over time, these mix, new languages form, new styles of pottery appear. Even the way people bury their relatives begins to shift. You see graves with objects from both cultures, necklaces made of shells from distant coasts, tools shaped in old styles, cattle bones placed carefully beside the dead. This mixing isn't always peaceful. There are signs of violence, broken bones, burned houses, weapons left behind. But there's also proof of cooperation, shared wells, trading posts, artifacts from far-off places, showing that people started to travel and trade more than ever before. Now let's talk about food. The Nile floods are both a blessing and a challenge. If the river rises too high, it washes away crops. If it doesn't rise enough, the fields dry up. People have to find ways to cope. This is where farming gets serious. Instead of just planting wild grains and hoping for the best, people begin to experiment. They dig channels to carry water where it's needed. They build dikes to hold back the flood. They plant crops in rows, not just scattered seeds. The goal is control. Control over water, over crops, over fate. As farming improves, the villages along the Nile grow larger. More food means more people can live in one place. More people mean more hands for big projects. The old world of wandering herders is fading. In its place, a new world is forming, one where people settle down, build permanent homes, and plan for the future. Let's pause and think about what this means. In most of the world, people were still living in small groups, moving with the seasons, surviving off what they could find or hunt. In the Nile Valley, something different is happening. People are rooting themselves in one spot. They're shaping the land, not just reacting to it. This is the first step towards civilization. But what really sets Egypt apart is the river itself. The Nile doesn't just provide water, it connects everything. You can travel for hundreds of miles from the deep south to the delta without ever leaving the green banks. Boats become the main way to move people and goods. Trade picks up, ideas spread faster. If someone in the south invents a new way to make pottery, people in the north hear about it within a few years. If a new crop works well in one area, it spreads quickly along the river. This kind of connection is rare in early human history. Most people lived in scattered pockets, separated by forests, mountains, or deserts. In Egypt, the river ties everything together. It's like a highway before highways existed. As the villages grow into towns, another change happens. People start to specialize. Some become full-time farmers. Others focus on making tools or weaving baskets or building boats. Some become leaders, organizing work and settling disputes. This is the start of social classes. Not just rich and poor, but different roles in society. Not everyone is equal anymore, at least not in how they spend their days. And then there's writing. The earliest writing in Egypt appears not long after these changes. At first, it's simple marks on pottery or bits of bone. Maybe it's just a way to keep track of grain or count animals, but it quickly grows into something more. By 3200 BCE, people are carving symbols into stone, recording names, events, and deals. Writing turns memory into something solid. It lets information travel beyond one person's lifetime. Why did writing appear here and not somewhere else? The answer is tied to all the changes we've talked about. When people live close together, share resources, and work on big projects, they need to keep track of things. Who owes what? Who owns which field? What happened last year? So they can plan for next year. Writing is the tool that makes all of this possible. Now let's touch on another piece, belief. When people move to new lands, they bring their old gods and spirits with them, but the land itself shapes belief. Along the Nile, the river becomes the center of everything. People begin to tell stories about gods who control the flood, who protect the fields, who watch over the dead. The old gods of the grasslands blend with local spirits. New myths are born. Over time, these beliefs get more organized. Priests appear, temples rise. Religion becomes a way to unite people, to explain the world, and to keep order. It's easy to take all this for granted, but think about how much had to happen, how many pieces had to fall into place. A climate disaster pushes people out of their old world. They arrive in a place where the river gives life, but only if you work together. New skills mix with old traditions. Villages become towns, towns grow into cities. Writing and religion appear. Leaders organize big projects, and all of it is shaped by the need to survive, to adapt, and to build something that lasts. Let's look at what came next. By 3100 BCE, the first kings appear in Egypt. They unite the towns and villages along the Nile under one rule. This isn't just one person taking charge. It's the result of centuries of cooperation, conflict, and blending. The first kings don't just build palaces. They organize armies, collect taxes, and keep order. They build monuments to show their power and to celebrate the unity of the land. We often think of Egypt as a place of pyramids and mummies, but the real foundation was laid much earlier in the choices of ordinary people. The decision to work together, to share water, to invent new ways of farming and building. The willingness to mix old and new, to blend cultures and ideas. That's what made Egypt possible. Here's something to ponder. If the Sahara hadn't dried up, would Egypt exist? If people hadn't been forced to move, to adapt, to invent, maybe the Nile would have stayed a backwater, a narrow strip of villages, never quite reaching the heights of civilization. The disaster of the desert created the opportunity for something new, and Egypt didn't just rise alone. The same pressures sparked change all across Africa. In the Sahel, south of the New Desert, new cultures grew up. People mixed farming with herding, built their own towns, created their own trade routes. The connections formed during the migration lasted. Goods, people, and ideas continued to move, building networks that reached deep into the continent. There's another angle to consider. The river made Egypt, but it also set limits. The valley is narrow, the desert walls are close. Everything depends on the flood, and when it fails, famine follows. This made the Egyptians careful, obsessed with order and predictability. They built calendars to track the seasons. They watched the stars, trying to predict when the flood would come. Their whole society was built around the cycle of water and sun. All of this, the organization, the planning, the rituals, left its mark. Egyptian civilization became famous for its stability. For almost 3,000 years it kept going, changing slowly, always tied to the river. Kingdoms rose and fell. New rulers came and went. But the heart of Egypt stayed the same, a narrow land full of life, surrounded by desert. What strikes me most is how something that started as disaster became the root of so much creativity. Forced out of their old world, people didn't give up. They adapted. They learned new skills, made new friends, built new ways of living. The result was a culture that could survive almost anything: flood, drought, invasion, even the loss of memory as centuries passed. Let's zoom out for a moment. The birth of Egypt wasn't just a local event. It was part of a bigger story, the story of how climate shapes history. When the land changes, people move. When people move, they change the places they go. Sometimes they build something new and lasting. Think about the legacy. The writing, the art, the science, the stories of gods and kings. All of it started with a river and a group of people trying to survive. The Egypt we remember, the pyramids, the tombs, the legends, only came later. The real beginning was much quieter. It was people digging ditches, planting seeds, sharing food, and learning how to live together in a world that was always changing. So next time you see a picture of the Nile or a statue of a pharaoh, remember this. Egypt wasn't born out of nowhere. It grew from the actions of people forced to adapt, to blend, to build something stronger than any one group could have done alone. The river was the stage, but the people wrote the play. And here's the most comforting part of this story. It's not over. Let's step back and look at the whole picture. The story of the Sahara turning from green to desert isn't just about a lost world. It's about cycles of rain and drought, of people moving and settling, of old ways fading and new ones being born. This is a pattern much bigger than a single place or time. It's the story of how the world changes and how people change with it. Every part of this story connects to something else. The Green Sahara wasn't just an odd blip in history. It was one swing of a pendulum that's been moving for millions of years. The climate shifts, the land transforms, and life either adapts or disappears. What happened in North Africa happened in other places too, just in different shapes. There were once forests where now there are plains. There were seas where we now find deserts. Nothing stands still forever. But here's what's really interesting. Even as the land changed, people found ways to keep going. They learned to read the signs, the colour of the grass, the levels of lakes, the calls of birds that only appear in wet years. Survival meant paying attention, sometimes guessing right, sometimes making mistakes. When the signs turned bad, some groups stayed and tried new tricks. Others packed up and moved, carrying pieces of their old world with them. When you follow the trail of these migrations, you see something amazing. People didn't just wander aimlessly. They followed ancient paths. Some went north, some south, some east along river valleys. Over generations, they mixed with other groups, traded skills and created new cultures. This is how traditions spread. A way of making pottery here, a song there, a type of food somewhere else. All mixed together, becoming something new. Think about what that means for the places they arrived. The Nile Valley, for example. It wasn't an empty land waiting for civilization. It was a crossroads. People brought stories of green grass and distant lakes, memories of how to herd animals, how to find water in dry places, how to build shelters that could survive heat and wind. The land itself became a meeting point, a place where different worlds met and blended. It's easy to see this as the end of a golden age, the loss of a green world. But nature doesn't work like that. The end of one world is always the start of another. As grassland shrank, new deserts formed. The Sahara became a barrier but also a bridge. Caravans later crossed it, carrying salt, gold and ideas. Even now, the old paths cut by ancient rivers influence where people travel and where towns appear. If there's a bigger lesson here, maybe it's this. Change is constant. What feels permanent, rivers, forests, rain, can disappear in a single lifetime. But people are good at adapting. That's our real talent. Not just building tools or making art, but knowing when to move, when to stay, when to let go of the old and try something new. The science behind all this, the cycles of Earth's tilt and orbit, reminds us we're part of a much larger system. No one can control the rain or stop the wind, but we can pay attention, learn, and pass on knowledge. That's what saved people when the Sahara began to dry. Not luck, but lessons. How to spot signs of coming drought, how to store food, how to travel long distances without losing hope. There's something comforting in that. Even when the world throws a curveball, people find a way. They build, they share, they remember. Sometimes they even thrive. The rise of Egypt and other civilizations shows how disaster can flip into opportunity if you're ready to see it. Let's get a bit more philosophical. Why do these stories matter now, thousands of years later? Maybe because they're still happening. The world keeps changing. Climates shift. People move. Borders change. Cultures blend. We're living in the middle of one of these cycles right now, though it might look different from the outside. The lessons of the Sahara, watching for warning signs, working together, being willing to move or adapt, are as important now as they were back then. And here's something else to think about. The Sahara still holds secrets. Under the sand there are old riverbeds, lost forests, and the bones of countless animals and people. Every year the wind uncovers something new, an ancient tool, a fossil, a scrap of pottery. Each find is a window into a vanished world, a reminder that nothing is ever truly lost. The land remembers, even when people forget. Scientists keep studying the Sahara, trying to predict what might happen next. Could the desert turn green again someday? It sounds impossible, but the answer is yes. The same cycles that dried it out could one day bring rain back, not soon, and not on a human timescale, but in the far future, maybe the sand will give way to grass again. New lakes will fill, herds will return, people will build new homes where only dunes stand today. That's the cycle of time. It spins on, slow and steady. Sometimes we notice, sometimes we don't. But we're all riding along with it, whether we like it or not. So what do we take from all this? Maybe it's a sense of perspective. The world is always in motion. Change is natural. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes sudden. But people have always found ways to cope. Sometimes by holding on, sometimes by letting go. The old Sahara is gone, but its legacy lives on. In cave paintings, in stories passed down, in the shape of cultures that grew up around its edges, in the skills and memories people carried as they left, and in the landscapes that still bear its mark, the ancient rivers, the stone trees, the fossils of whales with legs. When you look at a map, the Sahara seems empty, just sand and sky. But when you know the story, it's full of history. Every grain of sand covers something that was once alive. Every windstorm uncovers a piece of the past. There's something peaceful about that idea. It means the world isn't fixed. It changes, but it also remembers. Even loss can lead to new beginnings. And now, as you listen to this story, maybe lying in bed, maybe drifting towards sleep, you're part of that same endless cycle. Your own life is shaped by forces much bigger than you. Some you can see, most you can't, but you adapt, you learn, you pass on what you know. The story of the Sahara isn't really about a lost paradise. It's about what survives when paradise is gone. It's about people, your distant ancestors maybe, facing change and finding a way forward. And as the world keeps turning, as the nights come and go, those old lessons remain. Be ready for change. Take care of what you have. Help each other. And remember that even the harshest desert was once, and could be again, a place full of life. So tonight, as you settle in, remember this story. The world may change, but the spirit to adapt, to hope, and to build something new is always there. It's written in the sand, in the stars above, and in the quiet strength of people everywhere. That's the true legacy of the Green Sahara, and it's still unfolding one day at a time,